Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in some extraordinarily intense source material. We're looking at excerpts from Reverend Sun Myung Moon's 1977 address, which is titled, "The Will of God Requires Bold Action."
Yeah, and this isn't your typical Sunday sermon. This address is really, it's a defining manifesto. It sets out the required nature of religious life, gives a scathing assessment of the modern world's spiritual bankruptcy, and it all culminates in this forceful, really non-negotiable demand for absolute conviction and an immediate revolutionary action.
So our mission is to unpack this call for total transformation, to really understand the philosophy that demands such intensity. To start, the source claims religion wouldn't have even been necessary if there hadn't been a fall. So
Yeah.
what is this fall, and who initiated religion in the first place?
That's a critical distinction to make right up front. In this framework, man is the one who made religion necessary because of that failure, or the fall. And this isn't just a sin in the way we usually think of it. It's the severing of the original perfect relationship between God and humanity.
Okay.
The source really emphasizes that God initiated religion purely as a temporary tool for restoration, a pathway to help fallen humanity, recover its original design and become God-centered people. The core tension is always about rebuilding that fractured relationship.
So religion is essentially an emergency measure, and the source immediately warns the listener that undertaking this measure is, well, it's tremendously difficult. The speaker asks, pretty candidly, if anyone is fond of religion and who wants to go through the ordeal of religious life, and then answers, definitely no.
That admission sets a fascinatingly honest tone, almost weary. The religious way of life, according to this address, is explicitly not fun. It's described as peculiar, involving continuous self-discipline, tribulation, hardship, suffering. They stress that you're constantly placing yourself in a passive position, led by truth, rather than being free to act randomly or, according to your momentary whim.
And the contrast they draw here really defines their whole philosophy of life. On one side, you've got the normal Americans who sleep late after dancing until 3 o'clock in the morning, prioritizing comfort and self-indulgence. And on the other, you have the disciplined life required by the church, demanding strict adherence, rising early for service, meticulously shaping your actions, your thoughts, even your speech through discipline.
What's particularly insightful is how the address synthesizes this specific religious discipline with universal human necessity. It argues that discipline is required for success everywhere. In university life, within major corporations, mandated by national laws, you can't just decide to skip your final exam or, ignore the law of gravity.
I get that. Discipline is necessary for structure. But what separates this religious discipline from, say, the discipline needed to train for the Olympics or serve in the military? I mean, those require extreme personal sacrifice, too.
That's where the key distinction lies. Social laws and corporate rules. Those are inescapable bindings. They're necessary for the physical survival of society, and they're externally imposed. But religious discipline, that falls upon you only by personal choice.
Okay, personal choice.
And that choice is what elevates the discipline, because it forces the individual to relate to two worlds: the standard set by the secular earthly world and the higher, often opposing standard that springs from the spiritual world.
And that leads to a profound paradox. The speaker notes there is no immediate, tangible proof that this harder religious life is more valuable. You look the same in the mirror whether you danced until 3 a.m. or woke up at 5 a.m. for service. Yet the whole congregation is gathered because they have decided, through faith, that the mandate from the spiritual world is the most important value, regardless of physical proof. They've chosen the steeper path. Moving into the view of history, the address gives this really compelling image. It describes human history as running water, continually flowing, but moving in waves up and down, periods of progress and decay.
And through all these temporal waves, there's one central eternal thread. Man is temporal, changing, but God is eternal, unchanging, and absolute. So his destination for humanity is also unchanging and eternal. History might look chaotic, but it's ultimately being guided by the unshakable will of God toward a single point of restoration.
So we have this determined eternal direction, but the source highlights a stark modern contradiction. The external material world is developing so rapidly, creating this technological society. We have jets, computers, while mankind's spiritual understanding is just stagnant, stuck in what the address calls a primitive era.
And this is what creates the crisis. This is where the critique of existing religion lands with real force. The source argues that religion is failing, It's becoming utterly powerless and enslaved by certain formalities.
Right.
And the crucial point here is that tradition has become a shackle, too small and rigid to embrace the modern world's complexities.
I understand the diagnosis, that tradition feels rigid, but isn't generational rebellion sort of a constant? What specific evidence does the address offer that existing religion is truly powerless to retain the next generation? Other than, the general push-pull between youth and establishment.
The problem, they argue, isn't just rebellion, it's irrelevance. Since science hasn't proven God's existence, God has become hazy in people's lives. Religion is simply not equipped to resolve the deep conflicts of a rapidly changing secularized world. Because the external world doesn't respect religious influence, the youth are seeking a more open, immediate, and comprehensive atmosphere.
So, if God is responsible for both the religious and the secular realms,
Right.
and the current formats are failing to keep pace with technology, then the only conclusion has to be extraordinary, revolutionary action to completely change the format of religion.
Exactly. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the spiritual and physical worlds are in such massive conflict, spiritual stagnation meaning technological acceleration, that the source issues a dire warning. Without a radical solution, the two worlds will both cease to exist. Therefore, God must reveal a universal religion with a comprehensive ideology powerful enough to resolve this terminal conflict.
That's a high-stakes mandate. So what defines this new universal religion that's supposedly going to swoop in and save everything?
Well, it needs four things. It has to resolve denominationalism, possess a dynamic, magnetic force, appeal to idealistic young people, and provide a clear vision of world brotherhood following God's absolute will. The address specifically notes that American youth have exhausted their search for meaning in secular hedonism. They tried everything, even streaking, and hit a spiritual dead end. They're hungry for true purpose.
And this search for purpose leads us directly to the doctrine of action. The way forward isn't paved with easy contemplation. It's one of leaping and jumping over every hardship and persecution. God, they argue, loses interest in any religion that lacks the capacity to leap over obstacles.
The life of a member is framed as a matter of absolute, moment-to-moment courage. This is crystallized in the analogy of being stranded on a cliff face and a rescue plane drops a rope.
It's a life or death decision where timing is everything. You have to jump at a precise moment to seize the rope, and if you miss, you plunge to your death. There's no middle ground.
Why is that timing and courage so essential in the source material?
It's all about divine providence. In God's plan, opportunities open and close quickly. If you hesitate because of fear or caution, you miss the window of salvation. Only the person with the most absolute conviction and an adventurous, fearless mind will even make the attempt, and in doing so, they align themselves with God's schedule. And once that decision is made, the organization itself must be formidable. This is where the analogies become almost militaristic. The members are to be like a Minuteman-guided missile launched fearlessly, even toward Moscow. The 1977 Cold War context makes that a stunning and unsettling image.
Well, the Minuteman guided missile reference is the clearest expression of absolute, unquestioning global devotion you could imagine. The implication is profound. You are not a citizen of the United States or Russia or any specific nation first. You're a soldier for God's will. Launching fearlessly toward Moscow means the movement has to be prepared to tackle the largest ideological opponent in the world, communism, head-on and without any hesitation. It demands a complete surrender of individual national loyalties to the Church's higher global objective.
That scale of confrontation requires immense force, which brings us to the key analysis of momentum.
The source is very clear on this. If you slow down and lose momentum, you will be shattered by opposing forces. They use the analogy of a head-on collision. The faster car receives less damage. Or think about a bullet. It's made of soft lead, but because of its speed, it can penetrate steel. Moving like a bullet is necessary to smash through opponents and maintain momentum to prevent the external world from crushing them.
This speed and conviction require action, not just internal contemplative faith. The source makes a very sharp distinction between idle faith and active conviction, pointing to historical figures like Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Moses, all of whom lived their convictions through visible, sometimes radical, deeds.
They hammer this home with a very controversial negative example, John the Baptist. Despite his conviction, his faith, his 30 years of rigorous ascetic life in the wilderness, he is cited as a man of failure in what they call dispensational history.
Wait, let's quickly define that term, dispensational history.
Dispensation here refers to the specific historical time clock of God's plan for restoration. Every figure has a role at a specific time. And John the Baptist fails in his role, his specific historical mission, because he failed in action. He refused to follow Jesus. He felt his fame and reputation were at stake by following a simple carpenter from Nazareth. He prioritized himself over the mission. That detail is really revealing because it emphasizes that action is the final measure of spiritual worth.
And that failure leads to the concept of indemnity. This requires just an enormous level of commitment.
Correct. The address discusses three types of religious people. There are those sitting idle, those setting small, easy conditions of indemnity, and then there are those giving up their lives, translating their conviction 100% into action.
Could you clarify what the source means by indemnity in this context?
Indemnity is the idea of paying a price or a condition to restore what was lost because of the fall. Because humanity failed its responsibility, a difficult price has to be paid to reverse that failure. So, paying 100% indemnity means giving up your life, your comfort, your reputation, everything, to live the conviction absolutely. God, they argue, only seeks the third type, requiring an absolute and most bold attitude.
And this willingness to sacrifice often comes from a place of persecution. The source speaks openly about using the feeling of being an underdog or oppressed as a constructive stimulant for higher excellence. For instance, citing that Black people have excelled in sports due to oppression.
It is a dark form of psychology being deployed. The feeling of being oppressed, marginalized, or challenged becomes fuel. However, there is a critical caveat attached to this. The source cautions that while this negative feeling can be used constructively, God hates the feeling of revenge.
So the goal after achieving victory can't be retribution.
Precisely. If the blessing is misused for revenge or personal gain, it will be lost. The ultimate goal, they insist, is unselfish love. The leader and the members must be prepared to win and then embrace your opponents with pure, constructive motivation.
And the leader himself has to embody this comprehensive action. The source proudly notes that the leader must match words with deeds, being a teacher, a fisherman, a factory creator, and a farmer, never a stranger anywhere, able to tune into every phase of human life. It's an ideal of total versatility. Now we get to the section that's full of those surprising details that make the historical moment feel so tangible. There's a fascinating anecdote about the organizational dynamics between men and women within the church itself.
You're referring to the gender paradox they observed. The speaker points out that despite traditional expectations, women in the Unification Church were consistently outperforming men in the two major external activities, fundraising and witnessing.
It's an interesting statistic, and the explanation they offer for it is, well, it's definitely one of the most eccentric parts of the entire address. It ties into the high heel theory.
That's right. The claim is that, get this, high heels were originally invented because women were spiritually or physically lagging behind men, and the heels were meant to tilt you forward so you could catch up.
Wow. That analogy is culturally specific and bizarre, taking a fashion item and giving it cosmic significance. But is the underlying point, then, that the church is providing the spiritual mechanism, the metaphorical high heel, that finally allows women to achieve the parity and revolutionary action the world had denied them?
That's exactly the analysis. It reframes a mundane cultural object into a powerful symbol of spiritual progress. It highlights their belief that their movement unlocks previously suppressed potential and allows women to spearhead the restoration work. It's a way of saying, we provide the environment where the formerly suppressed can move fastest.
Beyond the practical anecdotes, the address also dips into a unique symbolic language, breaking down Chinese characters to explain core concepts like heaven and holiness.
This is used to underline the unifying principle of duality in action. For example, the Chinese character for heaven is broken down into characters meaning two in person. The implication is that two persons make up heaven, a perfect male-female relationship being the celestial standard.
And what about the character for holiness?
The character for holiness, often associated with the Bible, is depicted as the king of ear and mouth, suggesting that the path to holiness requires the highest standard of listening and speaking, hearing the truth and proclaiming it with authority. And grace, or mercy, is shown to involve righteousness created by putting self in the position of a sheep, symbolizing selfless sacrifice, much like traditional Christian imagery of sacrifice.
It all comes back to the core belief. Everything naturally comes in pairs. Two sides of the mouth to laugh, two hands to work, in order to create action and result. This unified dual action, they claim, is God's foundational way of working.
It creates a comprehensive framework where action, boldness, and the unity of opposites are the necessary result of deep spiritual conviction. It just reinforces the entire urgent message of the address.
The instruction for the future, then, is undeniably clear. Be bold and strong, because inaction is failure and the world is on the brink. As the address puts it, the blessing will not come to you, you must go to win it. The entire thrust is a movement based on risk and confrontation.
That boldness is the absolute requirement for being part of God's dispensation. They use the analogy of the world as a car speeding 100 miles per hour down a dangerously steep incline. The Unification Church claims to be the small brake lining, that special piece of friction that can squeeze the wheel and stop the tumbling world.
And if you choose to be that brake lining, you have to be prepared to be tested, burned, and bruised by the sheer force of that collision.
Indeed. The source concludes by saying that those who want to be that contact piece are signaling that they want to be tested in actual battle. Which raises an important question for you, the listener. If salvation demands that you give up everything to become the friction that saves the world, what action in your own life, whether personal, professional, or spiritual, requires you to risk being tested in actual battle, even if it means getting scarred and bruised in the process? That, they argue, is the quality God is truly seeking to find.